Get her out before she ruins the signing photos. Grant Mercer said it with a smile, as if he were asking someone to move an empty coffee cup. The room went silent. There were 23 people seated around the walnut conference table on the 41st floor of Northline Systems headquarters in Dallas. Legal pads were aligned. Silver pens rested beside thick contract binders. A wall display showed the Halcyon Freight and Rail logo beside ours. And beneath it glowed the number everyone had been talking about for months, $620 million. I was standing near the screen with the final infrastructure readiness report open when Grant pointed toward the glass doors. Maya Alvarez, your services are no longer required, he said. You've been dead weight for months. A deal this large needs executive talent, not a basement mechanic who learned computers in a sewing room. A few people looked down. A few looked at me. Blake Danner, Grant's brother-in-law and newly appointed chief operating officer, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man watching a trap close. Through the glass wall, in the reception area, my mother heard every word. She had taken 2 buses from Oak Cliff carrying a canvas grocery bag filled with chicken tamales and a container of green salsa because she knew I had been at the office since 3:40 that morning. She stood beside the receptionist in the blue cardigan she wore to church, holding the bag with both hands while 2 security officers walked toward me. Her face changed when Grant called me dead weight. That hurt more than being fired. I turned away from him and looked at Evelyn Shaw, the chief executive of Halcyon Freight and Rail. Evelyn was 61, silver-haired, and known for stopping billion-dollar deals over a missing comma. She had already uncapped her pen. Now she set it down. She did not look at Grant. She looked at me. I should have been embarrassed. I should have been afraid. Instead, something inside me went completely still. Then I smiled. Grant mistook that smile for shock. It was not shock. It was the moment I realized he had just made the most expensive mistake of his career, and he still believed he was demonstrating power. My name is Maya Alvarez. I was 36 years old, and for 8 years I had run the infrastructure operations that kept Northline Systems alive. My title was Vice President of Infrastructure Reliability, but titles had never mattered much in my department. My team managed data centers, backups, disaster recovery, cybersecurity routing, carrier contracts, system authentication, client integrations, and the thousands of invisible dependencies that only became visible when they failed. Sales executives closed contracts and rang a brass bell in the lobby. Marketing teams appeared in photographs. People like me worked below the celebration, making sure the promises were technically possible. I grew up in a 2-bedroom duplex in San Antonio, where my mother, Rosa, made school uniforms at our kitchen table. For years, the sound of a sewing machine was the soundtrack of my childhood. My father, Mateo, repaired electrical substations for a utility contractor. He taught me how to use a multimeter before I was old enough to drive. When I was 17, a switching error sent current through a line that had been marked inactive. My father never came home. The company called it an operational failure. My mother called it what it was: someone had assumed the invisible work was simple. After that, I became obsessed with systems. Not machines by themselves, but the decisions around them. Who checked the backup? Who signed the inspection? Who had authority to stop a launch? Who benefited when corners were cut? Who paid when nobody listened? I earned scholarships, worked nights, and finished an engineering degree at the University of Texas at Austin. I joined Northline when it was a regional technology contractor with more ambition than discipline. The founder, Thomas Bell, hired me after I spent 40 minutes explaining why his disaster recovery plan would fail during a real emergency. He laughed when I finished. "You just insulted every director in this building," he said. "No," I replied. "I insulted the plan. The directors can improve." He hired me the next morning. For 5 years, Northline grew fast. Then it nearly collapsed. A federal transportation client awarded us a major data modernization contract, but the financing package for the required server expansion fell apart 6 weeks before deployment. The banks considered us too exposed. Northline did not have enough cash to buy the equipment. If we missed the deadline, the company would lose the contract, owe penalties, and probably lay off 600 people. Thomas asked me for a miracle. I gave him a structure. I had already formed a small company called Blue Mesa Data Infrastructure to do consulting work on weekends. I proposed that Blue Mesa purchase the primary server clusters, backup arrays, and network security appliances. Northline would lease them at cost while I remained in a technical decision-making role. Blue Mesa would carry the financing risk, and Northline would receive the capacity it needed without pretending assets belonged to it. The agreement was reviewed by 3 law firms, 2 lenders, our audit committee, and the federal client. It was unusual, but legal. More important, it was transparent. The protection clause was simple: if Northline fired me without documented cause or removed my authority over the infrastructure Blue Mesa owned, the lease could be terminated after 72 hours notice. Northline would retain access to its data and receive a structured transition window. But its operational licenses, authentication certificates, and priority support rights would expire. No sabotage. No deleted data. No hidden switch. Just ownership. The problem was that Blue Mesa needed $2.4 million for the first equipment purchase, and I had only a fraction of it. My mother mortgaged her house. I begged her not to. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where she had sewn uniforms and slid the loan papers over. Your father died because people treated serious work like it was disposable, she said. I will not watch you build something serious and lose it because people with money think they are the only people allowed to take risks. I promised I would protect her home. For the next 18 months, I slept more nights in the data center than in my apartment. I learned the rhythm of cooling systems, generator tests, and overnight traffic spikes. I ate vending machine crackers at 2 a.m. and took conference calls from concrete hallways because the equipment rooms were too loud. My team became my second family. Omar Reyes could diagnose a failing storage controller by the sound it made. Naomi Brooks could find a security weakness in a polished system design before the vendor finished presenting it. Priya Nair documented every database dependency with the precision of a surgeon. We argued, laughed, covered for each other, and built an operation that went 1,143 consecutive days without a severe outage. Northline survived. Then it became successful enough to attract people who believed success had appeared by itself. Thomas retired after a stroke, and the board hired Grant Mercer as chief executive. Grant had spent most of his career buying companies for private equity firms, cutting costs, and selling them again. He arrived in a black town car with 4 tailored suits, a public relations team, and a collection of phrases he repeated in every meeting. Operational velocity. Talent density. Strategic simplification. In his first month, he removed family photographs from the executive floor because they looked provincial. In his second month, he fired 17 managers with more than 200 combined years of institutional knowledge. In his third month, he appointed Blake, his wife's younger brother, as chief operating officer. Blake had managed a luxury apartment portfolio in Scottsdale. He had never run a data center, negotiated a carrier agreement, or led an incident response. He had, however, spent holidays with Grant. That seemed to be the qualification that mattered. Blake started calling my department the basement. Our primary operations center was actually on the 14th floor, but accuracy had never interested him. He cut our spare hardware budget by 38%, delayed a generator replacement, and tried to cancel a redundant fiber route because he called it paying twice for the same internet. When I stopped him, he complained to Grant that I was resistant to change. Grant summoned me to his office. You need to learn how leadership works at this level, he said. I know how infrastructure works at this level. That is exactly the attitude I mean. I showed him the lease summaries, ownership schedules, and operational dependencies. He skimmed the first page, then pushed the folder back. Legal can handle paperwork. This is not paperwork. Blue Mesa owns the primary server environment. He smiled as though I were claiming ownership of the moon. Northline pays the electric bill, the employees, and the client contracts. Northline owns the operation. No. Northline operates on leased infrastructure. We will revisit that when there is time. There was always time for photographs. There was never time for the documents that made the photographs possible. The Halcyon deal became Grant's obsession. Halcyon Freight and Rail operated ports, warehouses, trucking networks, and regional rail systems across 19 states. It wanted Northline to build and maintain a unified logistics platform over 7 years. The contract was worth $620 million, but the prestige mattered almost as much. Grant believed it would double Northline's valuation and position him for a sale. For 7 months, my team worked brutal hours preparing capacity plans, failover tests, security audits, and disaster simulations. Evelyn Shaw attended 4 technical reviews herself. Unlike Grant, she asked precise questions and waited for complete answers. During the final review, she asked who had authority to stop deployment if the system failed readiness testing. I do, I said. Grant interrupted. Ultimately, I do. Evelyn looked at him. You have authority to overrule a technical stop? Grant leaned back. I have authority over the company. That was not my question. I answered before he could. Our governance policy requires my sign-off, the security officer's sign-off, and the client's acceptance. No single executive can override all 3. Evelyn nodded. Grant did not speak to me for 2 days. The week before signing, Blake asked Priya to give him administrator credentials for the production environment. She refused. He told her I had approved it. She called me. I told him in writing that executive titles did not replace access controls. He replied with one sentence, "You are making your future very difficult." I forwarded the exchange to legal and continued working. What I did not know was that Grant and Blake had already planned my removal. They scheduled it for the signing ceremony because Grant wanted maximum visibility. He believed humiliating me in front of Halcyon, the board, and my own team would send a message that no technical employee could challenge executive authority. He even had communications staff prepare an internal announcement praising Blake for consolidating fragmented operations. The announcement was timestamped 2 hours before I was fired. Back in the conference room, the 2 security officers stopped beside me. The older officer, Carlos Bennett, had worked in the building for 11 years. He would not meet my eyes. "I'm sorry, Ms. Alvarez," he whispered. Grant clapped once. "Let's move quickly. We have a historic partnership to sign, and I do not want personal emotions delaying it." That was when my mother opened the glass door. The receptionist tried to stop her, but Rosa Alvarez had spent 30 years raising a daughter alone, sewing through migraines, negotiating with landlords, and staring down bank officers who spoke to her as though an accent made her stupid. A receptionist was not going to stop her. "My daughter is not dead weight," she said. Her voice shook, but she did not. Blake laughed under his breath. "Ma'am, this is an executive meeting." My mother looked at him. "Then why are you in it?" Several people inhaled at once. Grant's smile disappeared. "Escort both of them out," he said. "Ms. Alvarez no longer belongs on this floor, and neither does her guest." I had endured months of condescension. I had watched Grant cut safety margins, erase names from presentations, and reward people who confused confidence with competence. I had kept my temper because one wrong reaction from me would be described as instability. But when he looked at my mother's canvas bag and church cardigan as though she had contaminated the room, anger burned through me so cleanly that it felt like clarity. I closed my laptop. I removed my company badge. I picked up a black notebook containing no passwords, no proprietary data, only my handwritten reminders and a photograph of my father taped inside the cover. Then I walked to my mother. Before we reached the door, I stopped beside Grant. "Read the Blue Mesa lease," I said. He gave a short laugh for the benefit of the room. "Your replacement can handle your unfinished paperwork. There is no replacement for property you do not own." The air changed. Judith Kane, the chair of Northline's board, turned toward Grant. "What does she mean?" Grant waved a hand. "A consulting arrangement from years ago. Nothing material." Evelyn Shaw closed the contract binder. I looked at her, then at Judith. "It is material." Grant stood. "Security." I left with my mother before he could say anything else. In the elevator, she held the tamales against her chest. The floor numbers descended in silence: 41, 40, 39. At 33, she asked the question she had been trying not to ask. "Are they going to take my house?" I turned toward her. Her mortgage had 11 years remaining. The original Blue Mesa loan had been refinanced twice. Northline's lease payments covered it, but termination would change everything. She had trusted me with the only home she owned. I took the bag from her and wrapped my arms around her. "No, Mom." "Are you sure?" "Yes." "What happens now?" The elevator passed 20. Now they learn the difference between firing an employee and evicting a landlord. Outside, the Texas heat hit us like an open oven. We sat in my car in the parking garage while my mother opened the food container, even though neither of us was hungry. I called Lena Park, the attorney who had written the Blue Mesa agreement. She answered on the second ring. "Maya? They fired me without cause." "How?" "In front of Halcyon, the board, security, and my mother." There was a pause. "Did they remove your technical authority?" "They removed my badge." "Did they document misconduct?" "No." "Performance failure?" "No." "Policy violation?" "No." Lena exhaled slowly. "Then Clause 14 is active. Do you want me to send formal notice?" I looked at my mother. Green salsa had leaked onto a napkin in her lap. She was wiping it carefully, as if keeping the car clean still mattered on a day when our lives had been turned upside down. For 8 years, I had protected Northline from outages, bad decisions, and arrogant people who assumed consequences could be delegated. I thought about Grant pointing toward the door. I thought about Blake laughing at my mother. I thought about 23 unsigned contracts and Evelyn Shaw setting down her pen. "Send it," I said. Lena's keyboard clicked through the phone. "At what time were you terminated?" I checked the dashboard clock. 4:15 p.m. Then the 72-hour notice expires at 4:15 p.m. Friday. A new email appeared on my phone before she finished speaking. Formal notice of lease termination and license suspension. I opened it, read the first paragraph, and felt the last piece of fear leave me. At that exact moment, 41 floors above us, Grant Mercer was still trying to restart the signing ceremony. He had no idea the clock on his company had already begun counting down. By 8 o'clock the next morning, I had 31 missed calls. Grant called 9 times. Blake called 6. Northline's general counsel called 4. The rest came from department heads, board members, and people who had ignored my warnings for months but suddenly remembered my number. I answered none of them. Lena had instructed me to preserve every message and route all communication through her office. Northline had terminated my employment. I was no longer obligated to provide free emergency consulting because its executives had failed to read their contracts. At 8:17, Omar sent me a text. Blake is in the operations center demanding title documents for the hardware. He says you hid them. I replied with 4 words. Nothing was ever hidden. The ownership schedules had been attached to Northline's audited financial statements for 3 years. Every server rack carried a Blue Mesa asset tag. Every annual report listed the lease as a related party transaction approved by the audit committee. Grant had signed 2 management representation letters acknowledging it. He had not been deceived. He had been careless. At 9:02, Blake emailed me directly. Your immediate cooperation is required to identify all company-owned equipment and credentials. Failure to comply may be treated as theft of corporate property. Lena responded before I could. My client has no Northline property. Northline is currently operating on assets owned by Blue Mesa Data Infrastructure under a lease your company terminated by removing Ms. Alvarez without cause. Future accusations should be supported by evidence or withheld. At 10:40, Northline's general counsel requested an emergency conference call. At 11:15, Lena declined. At 12:03, Grant sent a message marked confidential. Maya, emotions ran high yesterday. We are prepared to discuss a transition package if you help us stabilize the halcyon process. It was the first time he had used my first name without sounding annoyed. I forwarded it to Lena and went to my mother's house. She was in the kitchen reheating the tamales we had never eaten. The sewing machine still sat near the window. Beside it was a stack of Navy school uniforms waiting for hems. You should sleep, she said. So should you. I slept. You rearranged the same 6 spools of thread. That is not sleeping. She gave me a tired smile and placed a plate in front of me. For most of my life, food had been my mother's way of refusing helplessness. When my father died, she cooked for neighbors because she could not bear the quiet. When I studied for exams, she left fruit beside my books. When Blue Mesa almost missed a loan payment during its first year, she made soup and told me hunger made fear louder. I ate. At 12:30, Thomas Bell called. His speech had slowed since the stroke. But his mind was clear. The board contacted me, he said. Grant claims you created a secret dependency. Did you tell them the truth? I sent them the approval minutes, lender disclosures, and the video from the audit committee meeting where we explained the entire structure. Thank you. I should have warned you about him. You were recovering. I was still chairman emeritus. I saw the cuts. I told myself the board would control him. Boards usually control executives after the damage becomes measurable. Thomas was quiet. Evelyn did not sign, he said. I stopped chewing. Grant told everyone she only needed a short recess. She left the building. Halcyon's counsel sent notice that the signing was suspended pending verification of operational control. The first domino had fallen before the 72 hours even expired. At 2 o'clock, Northline issued an internal statement saying I had departed because of a leadership realignment. By 2:20, Grant was telling department heads that I had become emotionally unstable and was threatening the company. He did not know that Naomi was in the meeting. She sent Lena a written account immediately. That afternoon, a courier delivered Northline's first offer. They proposed purchasing all Blue Mesa equipment, software licenses, and support rights for $3.1 million. The independent replacement value was $11.8 million. The market value of the operating environment, including configured redundancies, support contracts, and transferable licenses, was closer to $16 million. Grant wanted to buy the floor under his feet for less than the cost of the concrete. Lena sent the offer back without a counterproposal. At 6:45 that evening, Omar called from his personal phone. I know I'm not supposed to involve you, he said, but I need to know what happens Friday. Nothing happens to the data. I know that. Blake is telling people you're going to wipe everything. I will not delete a single byte. At 4:15, Northline's priority licenses expire. Their administrative access to Blue Mesa hardware ends. Client data remains preserved, and Northline receives the export access defined in the agreement. So systems stay up? Core safety and continuity systems stay up. High-capacity processing, automated failover, premium support, and deployment privileges move into restricted mode. That will reduce production capacity by at least 68%. Yes. Halcyon will walk. That is Grant's problem. Omar lowered his voice. They're blaming you already. I know. What do you want us to do? Your jobs. Protect the data. Follow documented procedures. Do not resign for me, do not sabotage anything, and do not give Blake access he is not authorized to have. He was quiet for several seconds. You always told us no person should be the system. That includes me. But you own the system. I own equipment and licenses. The people are what make it work. Before hanging up, he said, for what it's worth, nobody in operations thinks you were dead weight. I looked across the kitchen at my mother, who was pretending not to listen. It is worth more than you think. Thursday brought lawyers. Northline threatened to seek an injunction. Lena replied with the signed lease, the board approvals, and 4 years of payment records. Northline accused Blue Mesa of creating an anti-competitive dependency. Lena reminded them that Northline had chosen the structure because no bank would finance its expansion. At 3:30, Grant called from an unfamiliar number. I answered before realizing it was him. Maya, listen to me, he said. His voice had lost its polished rhythm. This has gone too far. I agree. We can restore your title temporarily while we negotiate. You cannot temporarily restore trust. This company employs 2,400 people. You should have considered them before firing the person responsible for the primary infrastructure. You are enjoying this. No. I am documenting it. He breathed hard into the phone. Do you think Evelyn Shaw cares about you? She cares about leverage. The board cares about money. Your team will replace you as soon as they can. Then replacing me should be cheaper than respecting the contract. You were an employee. I was an employee and a vendor. You fired one and activated the rights of the other. His voice dropped. I can make sure you never work in this industry again. The threat was so familiar in its arrogance that it almost sounded rehearsed. You are on a recorded legal line, I said. He hung up. It was not actually a recorded line. Texas law would have allowed me to record a call I participated in, but I had not. The threat itself, however, appeared in Lena's contemporaneous notes, and Grant's panic told me more than the words did. At 4:15 Friday, the 72 hours expired. I sat in Lena's conference room with my mother on one side and 2 independent systems auditors on the other. A large monitor showed the transition dashboard. Blue Mesa's controls executed exactly as designed. No alarms screamed. No screens went black. No data vanished. Administrative certificates issued under the lease expired. Automated scaling stopped. Secondary processing moved to preservation mode. Vendor support priority reverted from critical enterprise to standard queue. Northline's deployment tools lost authority to push new code into the Blue Mesa environment. Within 11 minutes, Northline's transaction capacity fell to 54%. Within 27 minutes, it fell to 39% as workloads queued. At 5:06, 7 major clients received automated notices that service levels were at risk. At 5:19, Halcyon formally suspended negotiations. At 5:32, Grant emailed Lena accusing me of economic terrorism. At 5:41, Lena replied with the page number of the clause he had activated. The company did not collapse. That mattered to me. Payroll processed. Safety systems remained online. Existing client data was protected. But Northline could no longer pretend that the infrastructure beneath its promises belonged to it. By Monday, the board wanted a meeting. Lena hosted it at her law firm rather than Northline's office. Judith Kane arrived with 3 directors, the general counsel, and Grant. Blake did not come. According to Naomi, he had spent the morning ordering employees to search shared drives for proof that I had stolen the cloud. Grant looked as though he had not slept. His tie was crooked. The skin beneath his eyes had turned gray. Judith spoke first. Maya, we want to acknowledge that your separation was handled poorly. It was not handled poorly, I said. It was designed as a public humiliation. Grant slapped his palm against the table. This is extortion. Lena did not blink. Extortion involves obtaining something through unlawful force or threats. My client owns equipment your company leased. She exercised a written termination right after you fired her without cause. If you do not understand that distinction, it explains why we are here. Judith raised a hand before Grant could respond. What are Blue Mesa's terms? I placed 2 binders on the table. Option A, Northline purchases the infrastructure at independently appraised value. Blue Mesa provides a 120-day transition. I leave, and you build whatever leadership structure you want. And option B? Judith asked. I return as Chief Technology Officer with full authority over infrastructure, security, and technical readiness. Blue Mesa retains ownership and signs a new lease at market rates. I receive equity, a board observer seat, and written protection for technical employees who report safety or reliability risks. Grant laughed, but the sound was thin. Chief Technology Officer? You should be grateful if we return your old job. I opened the second binder. Inside were printed emails Lena had received from Naomi, Priya, Omar, and 2 employees in the executive office. One message from Blake described my team as server room rodents. Another ordered human resources to prepare my termination before the halcyon signing. A third message from Grant said, do it in front of the client. Everyone needs to see who controls the company. Judith read the final line twice. Then she looked at Grant. You told us this was a performance decision. It was. Where is the performance documentation? Her insubordination was obvious. Objecting to unauthorized production access is not insubordination, I said. Grant pointed at me. This is exactly what she does. She hides behind technical language to undermine leadership. The conference phone rang. Judith glanced at the display. It is Evelyn Shaw. Grant sat straighter. Put her through. Judith activated the speaker. Evelyn's voice filled the room. I will be brief. Halcyon will not sign any agreement with Northline unless Maya Alvarez has final authority over infrastructure readiness and Grant Mercer has no control over our technical acceptance process. Grant leaned toward the phone. Evelyn, you are receiving a distorted account from a disgruntled former employee. I watched you fire her before asking what she owned. The assets can be replaced. Then replace them. Silence followed. Evelyn continued. Our due diligence identified Ms. Alvarez as a key operational dependency 4 months ago. Your team received that report. Halcyon's draft includes a key person provision requiring her sign-off during the first 24 months. Judith turned slowly toward Grant. You knew? Grant's face changed. Not much. Just enough. He had known. Maybe not about every ownership detail, but he had known Halcyon considered me essential. He had fired me anyway because he believed Evelyn would sign before asking questions. We can amend the provision, he said. No, Evelyn replied. You can amend your leadership. The line disconnected. That should have ended the meeting. It did not. Grant stood and buttoned his jacket. You cannot remove me over this. My employment agreement guarantees an $18 million payment if the board terminates me. The company cannot afford that while the Halcyon deal is suspended. Judith's expression hardened, but she said nothing. Grant looked at me with a flash of triumph. He believed the board was trapped between his golden parachute and my infrastructure. Then the conference room door opened. Sarah Klein, Northline's chief financial officer, walked in carrying a red folder. I knew Sarah as a careful executive who rarely spoke before she had numbers. I had not expected her to be there. Grant's confidence vanished when he saw her. Sarah placed the folder in front of Judith. I apologize for arriving late, she said. I was with the audit committee and Northline's primary lender. Grant sat down. Sarah looked at me. Maya, there is something you need to know. Grant was not only trying to remove you. She opened the folder. He was preparing to sell Northline, and he represented Blue Mesa's assets as property the company owned. My mother gripped my hand beneath the table. Sarah turned one page toward the board. It was a financing schedule showing Blue Mesa's servers under Northline's asset column. Another page listed a shell company controlled by Grant's private investment partners. Blake's name appeared as a proposed officer. Grant spoke through clenched teeth. This is preliminary material. It was submitted to a lender, Sarah said. And your compensation agreement has a FERCA's exception for material misrepresentation. The room seemed to tilt. I had entered that meeting believing I was negotiating the future of my infrastructure. Instead, I was looking at evidence that Grant had planned to sell my mother's risk, my team's work, and my company's property as if all three belonged to him. Judith closed the red folder. Mr. Mercer, she said, the board will meet without you. Grant stared at her. Then at Sarah. Then at me. For the first time since I had known him, he had no polished sentence ready. The same security officer who had escorted me from the 41st floor stepped into the hallway outside Lena's conference room. This time, he was waiting for Grant. Grant did not leave quietly. He stood so fast that his chair struck the wall. You are making a catastrophic mistake, he said to Judith. That folder contains privileged strategy documents, not evidence of misconduct. Sarah remained standing beside the table. Northline's lender did not consider them privileged when your team used them to support a credit request, she said. Grant looked at the general counsel. Tell them. The attorney did not move. Mr. Mercer, he said carefully, the board has requested a private session. Grant's eyes shifted toward me. This is what you wanted. No, I said. I wanted you to read a lease. He gave a bitter laugh. You think they are going to hand you the company because you own some hardware? I do not want the company handed to me. Then what do you want? I thought about the 2 security officers, my mother's food cooling in a grocery bag, and 8 years of being praised in private while louder people collected the credit in public. I want the people responsible for a system to have the authority to protect it. I want my team treated like professionals. I want Northline to pay for what it uses. And I want you to stop pretending humiliation is leadership. Grant's jaw tightened. You will regret this. Judith pressed a button on the conference phone. Carlos, please come in. The door opened. Carlos Bennett stepped inside wearing the same security uniform he had worn 3 days earlier. He looked at me, then at Grant. Sir, he said, I need you to leave the room. Grant stared at him. The irony was so complete that nobody needed to name it. As Carlos escorted him out, Grant turned once more. Northline will bury Blue Mesa in litigation. Lena closed her legal pad. Then please preserve every document related to the proposed sale. Grant kept walking. The board's private session lasted 4 hours. My mother, Lena, and I waited in a smaller conference room overlooking downtown Dallas. Storm clouds had gathered over the city, turning the glass buildings dark. My mother sat on a leather couch with her hands folded over her purse. You did not tell me they tried to sell your machines, she said. I did not know. Our machines, she corrected. Lena looked up. My mother reached into her purse and removed a worn envelope. Inside was a copy of Blue Mesa's original operating agreement. When she mortgaged her house, I had given her 24% ownership of the company. She had never attended a board meeting, never taken a distribution beyond what was needed to cover taxes, and never once introduced herself as an owner. She still hemmed uniforms for 3 schools because she liked earning money with her hands. But the operating agreement gave her approval rights over any sale of substantially all Blue Mesa assets. I brought this because I thought those men might try to scare you into selling cheap, she said. I stared at her. You remembered the veto provision? She gave me a look I had known since childhood. Mija, I signed every page. Just because men in suits do not expect women like me to read contracts does not mean we do not read contracts. Lena smiled for the first time that day. Mrs. Alvarez, I would like you at every negotiation I ever conduct. My mother folded the agreement and returned it to the envelope. I charge by the tamale. We laughed, and the laughter felt almost disloyal to the seriousness of the moment. Then I realized that was why it mattered. Grant had tried to reduce us to roles he understood: employee, immigrant mother, technical support, poor woman with a cloth bag. He had never considered that my mother might own nearly 1/4 of the infrastructure company under his building. At 9:12 that night, Judith called us back. Grant had been placed on immediate administrative leave. Blake's access had been suspended. The audit committee had hired outside counsel to investigate the lender submission, the proposed sale, and Grant's representations to the board. Judith looked exhausted. We want to proceed with option B, she said. Not yet, I replied. Her eyebrows rose. I slid a revised term sheet across the table. The original option B had been written before I learned about the proposed sale. The new version required more. Blue Mesa would retain all ownership rights. The lease would be priced at independently verified market rates. Northline would reimburse emergency legal and audit costs caused by the termination. I would return as Chief Technology Officer with direct reporting access to the board's risk committee. Technical stop-work decisions could not be overruled by a single executive. Employees who raised documented safety, security, or reliability concerns would receive anti-retaliation protection. I also demanded a profit-sharing pool for the infrastructure and security teams. Judith read the final line. 8% of annual operating improvement allocated to eligible technical staff. Northline spent years treating prevention as an expense and crisis response as heroism. I want the incentives reversed. One director shook his head. That is unusually generous. So was my mother's house. Nobody answered. Judith looked toward Rosa. Mrs. Alvarez, are you comfortable continuing the lease? My mother opened the worn envelope and placed the operating agreement on the table. I own 24% of Blue Mesa, she said. I am comfortable if my daughter is respected, her people are protected, and your company pays a fair price. If not, I vote no. The director who had called the profit-sharing plan generous stopped speaking. Judith read the ownership page, then gave a small, almost admiring nod. We will need until morning. You have until 10 o'clock, Lena said. After that, Blue Mesa begins discussions with 2 competing operators who have already requested capacity information. That part was true. News traveled quickly in the infrastructure industry, especially when a $620 million contract stopped moving. By Saturday afternoon, 2 companies had contacted Lena to ask whether Blue Mesa's environment could support migration partnerships. For the first time, Northline was not negotiating with an employee who needed her paycheck. It was negotiating with a vendor that had alternatives. At 8:36 the next morning, the board accepted the revised terms. At 9:04, Grant was terminated for cause, subject to the results of the investigation. His $18 million parachute was frozen. Blake was dismissed later that afternoon after investigators found he had instructed employees to alter asset descriptions in internal presentations. At 9:30, Northline and Blue Mesa signed an interim restoration agreement. At 9:42, I authorized the reissuance of operational certificates. At 10:11, processing capacity returned to 71%. By 2 o'clock, it reached 93%. My team had done the rest without me. That made me prouder than any title. On Monday morning, I returned to Northline. My mother came with me. She wore the same blue cardigan she had worn when Grant ordered her removed. She also carried the same canvas food bag, although this time it held breakfast tacos for my team. Carlos opened the main entrance before we reached it. "Welcome back, Ms. Alvarez," he said. Then he looked at my mother. "Welcome, Mrs. Alvarez." No one asked her to wait in reception. Employees had gathered along the lobby and near the elevators. Some applauded. Some looked embarrassed. A few people who had watched my firing without speaking lowered their eyes as I passed. I did not need apologies from all of them. Fear makes ordinary people quiet. I understood that. But I also understood that cultures are built from what quiet people allow. At the 14th floor operations center, Omar stood near the door with Naomi and Priya. For several seconds, none of us spoke. Then Priya hugged me so hard my badge pressed into my ribs. "You told us not to quit," she said. "I meant it. We almost ignored you." "I know." Omar pointed toward the main dashboard. "We kept every client's data intact. No unauthorized access. No emergency exception for Blake. Every action logged." I looked at the green status indicators and felt tears rise for the first time since the firing. Grant had believed the system worked because he occupied the top floor. The system worked because people on the 14th floor followed rules even when the executives above them did not. My mother set the food bag on a desk. "You all look hungry," she said. That broke the tension. Within minutes, engineers were eating breakfast tacos beside server diagrams while my mother asked Naomi whether cybersecurity involved catching thieves before they entered through invisible windows. Naomi told her that was a better description than most vendor brochures. At 11 o'clock, I entered the same conference room where I had been fired. The contract binders were still on the walnut table, but the signing display had been removed. Evelyn Shaw sat with Halcyon's legal and technical teams. Judith sat across from her. Sarah represented Northline's finance department. The chair Grant had used was empty. Evelyn stood when I entered. "I am sorry for what happened in this room," she said. "You did not cause it. I watched it longer than I should have. You stopped the signing. After he humiliated you. Not before." Her honesty surprised me. She looked toward my mother. "And you must be Mrs. Alvarez. My friends call me Rosa. Then I hope I can earn that privilege." Evelyn asked Rosa to sit at the table. My mother hesitated. She had spent most of her life entering offices through side doors, delivering uniforms, cleaning up thread, and waiting while people with polished shoes decided whether to pay on time. Now the chief executive of a national transportation company was pulling out a chair for her. Rosa sat. Evelyn opened the revised Halcyon contract. "The original agreement was $620 million, she said. "Because of Northline's governance failure, Halcyon will reduce the initial commitment to $548 million and require quarterly independent risk audits for 2 years. Judith's face tightened. The difference was $72 million. Grant's arrogance had acquired a price. Evelyn continued. "We will proceed because we trust the technical team and because Ms. Alvarez now has the authority our due diligence assumed she already had." She turned to me. "Are you prepared to sign the readiness certification? After 2 conditions are added." Northline's general counsel shifted in his chair. Evelyn smiled slightly. "Go ahead. Halcyon receives direct notification if any executive attempts to override a documented security or reliability stop. And no employee may be removed from the Halcyon account for raising a good faith technical concern without review by the Joint Risk Committee." Evelyn looked at her counsel. "Add both." Judith looked at me. "Anything else?" "Yes." I placed my hand on the closed binder. "I want the meeting minutes to state that Northline's infrastructure team prevented a client-impacting failure during the transition. The company will not describe this as an executive rescue." Omar, Naomi, and Priya were watching through the glass wall. Judith nodded. "So recorded." Only then did I sign. My hand did not shake. The internal announcement went out at 12:18. Maya Alvarez appointed Chief Technology Officer as Northline strengthens technical governance. I hated the phrase strengthens technical governance. It sounded as though governance had improved naturally, like weather clearing after rain. It did not say that a powerful man had tried to steal value, humiliate an employee, and sell property his company did not own. So I asked communications to add one sentence. The board recognizes the infrastructure, security, and operations employees whose documented controls protected client data and service continuity during the leadership transition. That sentence mattered more to me than my title. Grant tried to control the story from outside the building. The next day, he posted online that he had chosen to pursue new opportunities after completing a successful transformation. He described the halted Halcyon signing as a normal negotiation and suggested that legacy vendors had exploited operational complexity. Then he filed a lawsuit seeking an emergency order against Blue Mesa. He claimed I had concealed ownership terms, interfered with business relationships, and coordinated employees against him. His attorneys requested expedited discovery, apparently believing the threat of legal costs would pressure us into a cheap settlement. Lena called me after reading the complaint. He wants discovery, she said. Give it to him. Discovery worked both ways. Blue Mesa requested Grant's communications with Blake, the lender, the private investment group, and the shell company listed in Sarah's red folder. We requested every draft valuation that included Blue Mesa assets. We requested messages about my firing, the Halcyon key person report, and the public statement about my mental stability. Within 9 days, Grant's attorneys asked to pause the case. Within 16 days, they offered to dismiss it. Lena refused unless the dismissal included payment of Blue Mesa's legal fees and a written correction stating that I had not sabotaged Northline or concealed any ownership interest. Grant resisted until the audit committee found a message he had sent Blake 2 weeks before firing me. Once Maya is gone, we fold the equipment into the sale presentation. Nobody will separate the company from the infrastructure after closing. That message turned arrogance into evidence. Grant dismissed the lawsuit, paid the fees, and signed the correction. The board's investigation later concluded that he had materially misrepresented Northline's assets to a lender and failed to disclose conflicts involving his investment partners. The matter was referred to regulators. I was not involved in what happened after that, and I did not need to be. Justice does not always require a front row seat. Sometimes it is enough to stop protecting a person from the consequences of his own documents. The next 6 months were harder than the revenge stories people later told about me. Restoring certificates took hours. Restoring a culture took much longer. I rehired 7 experienced employees Grant and Blake had pushed out. I increased on-call pay. We replaced the generator Blake had delayed and restored the redundant fiber route he had called duplicate internet. We documented every major dependency and assigned at least 2 trained owners to each critical process. I refused to become the new single point of failure. That surprised some board members. They expected me to protect my importance after seeing how much leverage it had created. But leverage was never the goal. Resilience was. I promoted Naomi to Vice President of Security Architecture. Omar became Director of Infrastructure Reliability. Priya led Data Platform Engineering. The profit-sharing pool paid its first distributions after 2 quarters because system efficiency improved and vendor penalties fell. The amount on Omar's statement was not life-changing, but he brought it to my office anyway. My daughter starts college next year, he said. This covers her first semester housing deposit. That was the moment the contract became more than revenge. At home, Blue Mesa's market rate lease generated enough income to pay off my mother's mortgage 4 years early. I brought the final payoff letter to her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. She was repairing the sleeve of a band uniform while a baseball game played quietly on television. I placed the envelope beside the sewing machine. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." She adjusted her glasses and read the letter twice. Then she sat very still. "The house is paid?" "Yes." "All of it?" "All of it." She touched the paper with the tips of her fingers. "I thought I might lose this place because of those machines." "You saved those machines." "No. I helped you buy them." "You saved Northline, too." She shook her head. "I did not do that. You invested when nobody else would." Tears filled her eyes. "Your father would be proud." "Because of the company?" "No," she looked toward the framed photograph of him on the shelf. "Because they tried to make you ashamed of where you came from, and you made them pay fair market value for it instead." A year after my firing, Northline held its annual leadership meeting in the same conference room. The walls had been repainted. The old walnut table had been replaced by a longer one with built-in screens. Companies like to renovate places where they behaved badly. New furniture gives people permission to call memory outdated. Judith asked me to speak to 240 employees. I brought no slides. "Last year, Northline nearly lost its largest contract," I said. "Not because we lacked talent, technology, or clients. We nearly lost it because leadership confused visibility with value. I saw engineers in the back rows. I saw salespeople near the front. I saw Carlos standing beside the doors. My mother sat in the first row wearing a navy dress she had made herself. A reliable system is built from work most people never see, I continued. Backups are invisible until data disappears. Redundant routes look wasteful until a cable is cut. Experienced employees look expensive until nobody else knows how to recover. Respect is not a reward we give people after a crisis. Respect is part of preventing the crisis. The room was quiet. I was called dead weight in this building. The truth is, no employee should need to own the servers to prove her work has weight. The applause started in the back, where the technical teams were seated. Then it moved forward. It was not polite applause. It had memory in it. After the meeting, Evelyn asked to speak with me privately. Halcyon's first deployment phase had finished 3 weeks early. Service reliability exceeded the contract target. I assumed she wanted to discuss the next rollout. Instead, she handed me a proposal addressed to Blue Mesa. Halcyon wanted my company to develop 3 independent regional recovery centers in Colorado, Virginia, and Oregon. Northline could participate as an integration partner, but the prime contract would belong to Blue Mesa. The initial value was $96 million. I read the cover page twice. Why us? I asked. Because Northline's technology is good, Evelyn said, but Blue Mesa's governance is why I trust it. That was the second time in my life someone had looked at the invisible structure behind a system and decided it had value. The first person had been my mother. I took the proposal home before responding. Rosa read every page. At the end, she tapped the section describing executive oversight. This gives you final stop authority? Yes. And the employees receive profit sharing? Yes. And they cannot sell our equipment as theirs? No, she nodded. Then we should charge enough. Blue Mesa accepted the project. Over the next 5 years, the company grew from 4 contractors to 32 full-time employees. We opened offices in Dallas and Denver. We built systems for hospitals, transportation networks, and emergency communication providers. I remained Northline's chief technology officer, but Northline was no longer my employer in the old sense. It was Blue Mesa's customer and partner. That difference changed every conversation. Every contract clearly listed ownership. Every risk had an assigned decision-maker. Every employee knew how to report a concern without asking permission from the person causing it. I saw Grant only once more. It happened at a technology leadership forum in Phoenix, 4 years after the firing. I was leaving a panel when he approached me near the hotel lobby. He looked older. Not ruined, not homeless, not transformed into the kind of villain stories like to punish beyond recognition. He wore an expensive suit and a conference badge from a consulting firm. Powerful men often land softly, even after falling. Maya, he said. I stopped. I have wanted to apologize. I waited. I was arrogant, he said. I underestimated you, and I handled the situation badly. You planned it in advance. His eyes shifted. Yes. You humiliated my mother to impress a client. Yes. You tried to represent our property as yours. He looked toward the lobby windows. I convinced myself it was part of the company's enterprise value. That is a longer way to say yes. He nodded. I am sorry. I believed he regretted the outcome. I was less certain he understood the harm. But apologies are not court verdicts. I did not need to prove what was inside him. Yes, I said. He waited for more. That is all, he asked. Not every apology purchases a conversation. I walked away. I did not feel anger. I felt distance. Distance is sometimes the cleanest form of justice because it means the person who once controlled your breathing no longer controls your attention. I still have the badge Carlos asked me to surrender on the day of the Halcyon signing. I also have the first market rate invoice Blue Mesa issued to Northline after I returned. My mother placed them in a double frame and hung it beside her sewing machine. She says they are the 2 sides of the same story. The badge is what they believed they could take from me. The invoice is what they finally had to admit I owned. People often ask whether my revenge was watching Grant lose his position, his $18 million payout, and the sale he had planned. It was not. My revenge was returning through the front door with my mother beside me. It was hearing executives address her as an owner. It was watching my team receive part of the value they created. It was signing a contract with my own name instead of standing behind someone else's photograph. Most of all, it was proving that invisible work is never truly invisible. It is only ignored by people who have not yet tried to live without it. And the people holding up the roof should never have to ask permission to sit at the table.